It has suddenly become clear why Alireza Firouzja has played so little chess over the last 12 months. So as we can see on screen here, he's been pulled in another direction into the fashion industry. Now this article was released on chess.com a couple of days ago by Tajay JS, and he got this information from a recent interview. So when asked about this alternative career path, this is what Alireza had to say.
I was in this industry like for 2 years now, and it's a kind of serious thing. It's a bit maybe like getting time from my chest, but I like to have both things together.
So fair enough that he's considering things outside of chess, but it will be such a shame if he were to turn his back on the absolute elite top level of chess, which you would have to do if you took a second career or made that your primary career, because Alireza is just so good that he could become world champion. And this game I'm going to show you here demonstrates that, because not only does Alireza play super aggressive, superb chess, but he thinks outside the box. He brings ideas to the board. So this game was played in the European Team Championships in 2021. Alireza was playing for France. He'd recently moved there, got French citizenship. His opponent was Mustafa Yilmaz, a Turkish grandmaster. Now Alireza was close to breaking 2800, and this was one of the games that helped move him towards that incredible landmark barrier. So he kicks off with his favourite e4. We see a Sicilian on the board. Now knight f3, pawn to d6, and Alireza goes for the open Sicilian, black captures, and both of these knights now develop, and we see pawn to a6, starting the Najdorf variation by taking away the b5 square. Now bishop e3, and this is known as the English attack. White seeks to clear the queen side and then castle the king over there. e5 now played, and this is the classic counterpunch. You kick that knight back in the centre and then develop the bishop here, plugging the gap, the hole rather, that you've just created on d5. Now you are giving yourself a weak backwards pawn, so white's got the better pawn structure, but in compensation, black gets an initiative going here in the centre, and they've also got this half open c-file to work with, try and attack the white king. So queen d2 played, prepares to castle, the knight develops, the king goes, bishop e7 played, and now Alireza goes pawn h3. He wants to start the classic pawn storm idea on the king side. b5 played, so we've got a race on our hands. Pawn to g4. The rook now hits the semi-open file, and after this king slides over to b1, standard prophylaxis move, we see the knight come to b6, heading on this standard remaneuver that you very often see in these structures. g5 now from Alireza, so it lets the knight into h5 by moving that pawn forward, but okay, on the edge of the board, the knight's not sitting so great, but it does stop the h-pawn advancing. You keep an eye on f4, so okay, you give something, you get something. And now pawn to h4 from Alireza, not forced, but he wants to get rid of that one as a target for the bishop, gains a bit of space, supports this pawn, not such a bad move. And now the knight hits c4, he chops it off because you don't want to give up this bishop here, that's the best bishop for white in the position, and after the rook recaptures, now this knight jumps to d5. So it does offer a pawn if black would take it, but this is a bad move because of the follow-up of bishop to b6. I mean, your rook also looks a bit clumsy there anyway, but this is just a problem, because after the queen moves, you land this check, and then you're spoiling the castling rights, and you can even follow up with this knight c5 move, forking these two. Then you'd have to take, the queen crashes through, and white's doing excellently. So if we come back here, we don't see the rook taking on e4. Instead, the bishop chops off that monster knight, the queen recaptures, and queen c7. So it attacks this pawn here, and this is classic Alireza. So how many of us would play a move like pawn to c3? Or rook c1 maybe, or rook d2, some kind of standard defensive move. Well, not Alireza. In this position, I mean, feel free to try and guess for it. He plays the move of knight to d2, and this is why he just kept steamrolling these 2600s, because he'd create these complications. Now the idea is that if the rook captures the pawn, then you challenge the c-file. Now black is forced to capture the rook, it's got nowhere to go, good to retreat to. This rook captures, you hit the queen, it slides to d7, but then there's this killer silent move of knight to f3, and it actually stops the black king from castling, because otherwise you lose this pawn on e5. You can't recapture due to this pin, and therefore if you can't castle in this position, well, what are you actually doing? The knight is paralysed, bishop paralysed, there are check ideas down here, the rook could be invading. Huge initiative for white for the sake of a pawn. So that's why taking on c2 is no good. The rook drops back. Now we see rook c1, but again after castles, pawn c3, Alireza now starts to go his own way on the queen side rather, because he could go c4 at some point, but that's not what he's after. g6 now from black, so possibly looking to re-maneuver that knight into the game. Now rook c2, the rook comes to b8, preparing to push on with the b pawn, and after this one doubles, we see a5 renewing that threat, and Alireza has to take action. Now what's the top computer move? Well, they want pawn to c4, but not Alireza. This is where he just plays something exceptional, blows up the queen side. But before I show you that one, a shout out, if you can indulge me 21 seconds, to the sponsor of this video, AIMCHESS. Is this you toiling away trying to improve your chess? If so, you need AIMCHESS in your life. They'll take your recent game data from Lichess, chess.com, bring in personalized lessons and skyrocket your rating. Use the link down below, try it for free, and code EPIC at checkout will get you discount if you do want a premium plan. So in this position, Alireza played pawn to b4, an exceptional move because you're moving the pawns in front of your king, which you're generally advised not to do. You've got all these heavy pieces lined up trying to checkmate you. Now, if the black pawn captures, which didn't happen, then the idea is that after you recapture, actually the opening of the c-file favours white because the rook takes back, the queen has to go, and once again we see white actually taking over the initiative. This knight b3 move is powerful because you can jump to a5 and then c6 as I'm highlighting there. So good for white. That's why taking's not so good. And that's why we see the rook now slide across and create all sorts of horrible pins and threats and things going on down here. So what did Alireza have in mind for this? And black also wants white to take here, start trying to do some stuff down the b file, then open it like this. But that's not Alireza's plan. This is where he just goes all in on this idea. He plays pawn to a4. I mean, it's just beautiful how he knows when to break the rules. Now, in the game, we see a takes on b4. That's really the acid test of all this. If you take here, just to show you this one, well then this pawn advances. And actually it's a very powerful passed pawn because it's supported by the bishop, you've got a powerfully centralised queen, and this rook's actually run out of squares now, plus the c4 coming, good for white. So instead, we see takes on b4, but you can see the eval bar go. It's actually a mistake, although it doesn't look like it, because white can't recapture the pawn, for example, or you simply lose down here, of course. That's absolutely game over. But coming back here, we didn't see the pawn recaptured. Can you guess what Alireza played here in this position? So the move he played was not taking this pawn in any way, because then black starts crashing through here. Instead, he goes for this beautiful idea of giving the queen for the rook. Now the queen recaptures, but it's not quite a queen sacrifice because he is winning the queen instantly back. Because after the recaptures, he's barreling down the c-file, and we see the queen give itself up. Because if you retreat, then after takes with check, king g7, well, the big problem here is the a pawn running down. And not only is that going to be going all the way, but you've also got this second rook coming to the 7th to keep the queen. Too many problems for black to deal with. That's +9 for white. So the queen gives up, rook recaptures, and now if black takes this rook, the problem is the passed pawn, because after black takes there, then the b pawn gets running. You can bring the bishop to stop it, it keeps going, and this is roughly how the line goes. You can go knight c4, but just to demonstrate the idea here, if you go b7, bishop comes, bishop a7, well, you can't stop this one making a queen, and then you're a piece up. It's a one end game. So this is why the rook didn't swap here. It slides across, but same problem after pawn a5. How are you stopping the passed pawn? So the knight comes to f4, finally re-enters the game, trying to distract the bishop. But rook c7 from Alireza, he's undeterred. This one drops back. Rook d7 pressures the pawn, pressures the bishop, and now black goes for counterplay, hops in the knight, picks up the b pawn, but Alireza's not interested. He just advances his passed a pawn. Knight takes, pawn a7, the rook goes, and now the rook takes on d6, and the bishop kicks it. It comes into d7, and after the knight defends it, well, now Alireza takes advantage of the square that the knight has just left control of, drops that rook to d5, pressures this pawn, and now if you go b4, well, then the knight comes into the game. There's problems with the e5 pawn, just fresh waves of attack. These pieces hopelessly uncoordinated. So instead of advancing the pawn, black goes for a tactical idea, with the idea being if you capture here, then black's going to take the knight, force the bishop to recapture, pick up the a pawn, and then okay, anything can happen. Even though white wins this pawn, you can hold those sort of endgames, one pawn down on the king side. But Alireza, he does not take the pawn. Instead, he brings the knight to b3, and it forces resignation because the bishop is hit. Let's say it drops back to c7 here. Well, then you pick up the b5 pawn. Not only are you a pawn ahead, but there's still all of these problems. The rook's tied down, the knight's coming into the game, plus the king, and black's just not long for this world when the pieces are just so stuck for moves. So Alireza, if you're watching, please choose chess, not fashion. I hope you all enjoyed this one. If you want to see another exceptional game, then check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching and see you soon.